Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video about me talking about the 2000s pop punk big three. First we took a look at who's held up the best, then we took a look at 2013, the return of all three bands, as it was the first time in a while that all three of them had come together to make an album in the same year. We're gonna, backtrack in this one for a second, because all at around the same exact time, these bands also had something bad happen to all of them. And that was their future became uncertain, all from around 2008 to 2010. Let's just start off with the first band here. We have Panic at the Disco, who on September 27th of 2005 released their debut album, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, which came right after From Under the Cork Tree from Fall Out Boy, which was released on May 3rd of 2005. And then Paramore themselves also released their album before Panic at the Disco on July 26th of 2005, called All We Know Is Falling. So this was the year that all three of them did release something, and two of them released their debut album. And unlike Paramore, Panic at the Disco's album did take off. Their debut album took off with songs like this.
Let's get these T-hearts beating faster, faster. So testosterone boys and hard-looking girls. I chime in with a haven't you people ever heard of closing a damn door? No.
That really carried the album all the way to number 13 on the US Billboard charts for rock. Now this one was strictly pop punk, and the band was supposed to follow up this album in 2007, as it is now, that album was scrapped. It's now known as the Lost Cabin album. If you want to learn more about that, there will be a icon above my head. I made a video, What If Panic at the Disco released Cricket and Clover instead of Pretty Odd. It's a long story, so I'm not going to go through it here. But after they scrapped that, they said, let's do this. And on March 21st of 2008, Pretty Odd was released, and they were the first of the three bands to follow up their albums. And Pretty Odd, I think, confused a lot of people, because they went from this band who was like this more pop-punky kind of band to now sounding like the Beatles and the Beach Boys, but because of this one song right here.
'Cause it's 9 in the afternoon, and your eyes are the size of the moon. You're good 'cause you can, so you do.
That carried the whole entire album and has become one of their most streamed songs to date. And it's took off, and this album actually ended up selling number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, which is one of 4 albums to at least go number 1 or number 2 from them. And now this album is just strictly forgotten about, but, you know, we've talked about that before. It's what happened after this release that really started to spark some things about what the future of the band was going to be, as it was the only album that featured bassist John Walker. He decided to leave in 2009, along with the kind of vocalist. He did like backing vocals, took lead vocals every so often. Lead guitarist and main songwriter Ryan Ross also left with Walker in 2009, leaving at this point just Brendan Urie and Spencer Smith, and Smith was the drummer, and then we got the singer Brendan Urie, who now has to take over most of the songwriting prowess. Now, it was more of disagreements that led to this band's breakup, but there was no way people were like, this is not happening, not as a duo. They're going to need a lot more than that, and that was left up in the air. Then we have their counterparts, Fall Out Boy, who later that year, December 16th, right before the end of the year, and on Christmas, they decided to release their follow-up to their successful album, their first ever number 1 album, Infinity on High, which came out just February of the previous year, so they were like following it up fast. And Fall Out Boy had already become this big mainstay from the albums From Under the Cork Tree and Infinity on High, with songs like these. So you can already understand why, but then fans heard this thing and I don't think were confused. They just were more ticked off than anything, because although it still has a remnants of pop punk, they took more of an alternative rock route, and these songs were a lot more the songwriting approach by Pete Wentz was a lot different than it was the first two albums. They had a lot of features on this thing, and then, you know, in 2009 they had, I know Joe Troman had mentioned that, you know, the band was playing shows where they were getting stuff thrown at them and just booed for playing the new stuff, and it just wasn't feeling great anymore. So after releasing a cover of Michael Jackson's Thriller in 2009, Fall Out Boy said, you know what? No, we're going to take an indefinite hiatus, and who knows, we'll either come back or we won't. And then that's two of the three down. Let's talk about the band that actually had success in 2009 while those two bands were seemingly trying to figure things out, which was Paramore themselves. They, on June 12th of 2007, they released their breakthrough album Riot, which, like Panic at the Disco's Pretty Odd, was carried by this one song. Their biggest hit to date, and people were like, how are they going to follow this up? Are they going to be a one-hit wonder? What's going on? Well, in 2008, they released the song Decode, which was on the Twilight soundtrack, and a lot of people said, oh, hey, you know what? Maybe they are going to release something different. Maybe they weren't lying to us, because they released their fourth single from Riot, I'm sorry. That's What You Get in 2008, after speculations that the band might break up was at the rise. They kind of made that music video to say, hey, no, we're around, we're not going anywhere. And then on September 29th of 2009, their third studio album, Brand New Eyes, hit stores. And it was, once again, strictly pop punk. You get Taylor York, who starts to do more of the writing with Josh Farro and Hayley Williams themselves. And you listen to this album and you just really hear the band venting with each other. Like, this was actually, you know, the album where they thought, maybe if we just write these songs, that we can squash everything, we can be fine. But around 2010 or so, the Farro brothers left the band. Josh Farro mainly spoke out and said he felt Paramore was felt like it was a ploy to have Hayley Williams start her solo career, because she was signed with it was a certain record label. I would have to look at it again, but yeah, it's just something that kind of took the world by storm, and now all of a sudden, it was Atlantic Records she signed with, but anyway, now all of a sudden, you have all three of the pop-punk big three just kind of questioning, are we even still going to go? Because, I mean, at least with Paramore, it made sense, because there was still three people left. They were basically, at this point in time, just minus a drummer. And Fall Out Boy, it was, we could come back, but we don't know. So we were kind of keeping that hope up, and with Panic, it was like, they may not go on as a duo, but they can add members if they want to. Bands do that all the time. And then, right around 2011, stuff started happening again with two of the three bands, might I say. Around this time, Paramore started releasing singles starting June of 2011. They released 4 in that year: Monster, Renegade, Hello, Cold World, and In the Morning, and announced the release of an EP called The Singles Club. They said they wrote new music, but they weren't quite ready to announce an album, make that album yet, the 4th studio album. So to hear this from people kind of got fans up, like, oh, this is it. They're not going anywhere. They're a trio now. It's different, but it was glad to hear them, still going. So there's 1 out of 3 out of the way. And then Panic at the Disco eventually didn't add members. Brendan Urie and Spencer Smith went on themselves, and early that year, right before Paramore released the Singles Club on March 22nd, 2011, Panic at the Disco released Vices and Virtues. Now, it is their 2nd lowest selling album of their discography, but it still sold at number 7, and it was carried by this single, as the other 2 weren't really that good. But now we get clarity, knowing that 2 of the 3 bands in the top 3, or in the 2000s pop-punk Big 3 are back. But we're still left wondering, what's going on with Fall Out Boy? In 2010, Andy Hurley and Joe Troman joined forces with members from Alkaline Trio and Anthrax to join the Damn Things, and they released their debut album that year as well. And in 2011, Patrick Stump released his debut and still only studio album to this point, called Soul Punk, where he experimented a lot more with the pop genre, and then Pete Wentz kind of went and did his whole crappy acting career thing, which never made it out to be anything, but that was the only one that was uncertain to people, and we never knew what was going to happen and whatnot because of the way the Damn Things just kind of, did good, and Andy Hurley and Joe Troman seemed happy to be playing the music again, and Patrick Stump, if there was anybody who could take off in a solo career in Fall Out Boy, it was him, and Pete Wentz would just, keep doing his own thing, but in 2013, I think we got the news we all wanted to hear. February 4th of 2013. This was right, I think, after, right after Paramore released a single for their upcoming 4th studio album. It was titled Now, and then Panic at the Disco came in a little bit afterwards, so we'll get to them in a minute. But yeah, on February 4th of 2013, Fall Out Boy made their big comeback with My Songs, Know What You Did in the Dark, Light 'Em Up. And then, that's when we knew we got clarity on the 2000s pop-punk Big 3. However, they weren't really pop-punk anymore, were they? And I'm talking about all of the bands. They all decided to take this change. Paramore went more with a pop-rock type thing, eventually going into synth-pop. And then we have Fall Out Boy experimenting with a lot more pop genres, electronic genres. Same with Panic at the Disco. As in 2013, though, to go along with Spencer Smith and Brendan Urie, they did add Dylan Weeks, who that would be his only album, their 2013 album, Too Weird, Too Rare, which came out October 8th of that year. It would be the only album where he would be credited as an official member before being demoted to a touring member. And yeah, around these times as well, Josh Frost said he takes back his comments about what he said about Hayley Williams and Paramore. They have since squashed things. They've never talked about working together again, but they said they still see each other every so often, and Zach Farrow has since returned to the band despite Jeremy Davis leaving. Zach Farrow has returned to the band and is currently, once again, the drummer, and at this point, Panic at the Disco is just Brendan Urie, but hey, he's at the top. He's higher than he ever was before, so he's got to be feeling good. And Fall Out Boy, although people just kind of tend to be like, break up already, like Panic at the Disco, they're as big as they were in like 2007 at this point in time. They're still selling records, and they can still write a bop or two. And just to know that these bands are still around after one of them, Paramore, multiple times thought about calling it quits. One of them said, "We're taking a break, but we also might not be back." and Panic at the Disco thinking, should we go on as a duo? Should we get new members? Or should we just, are we done? And, you know, to this day, you just go, maybe sometimes we should all just not worry and let things pan out as they were. Because in the end, bands come back at some point, sometimes, maybe not. But it's stuff like this, when you hear that a band member leaves or passes away or something, and you just think to yourself, oh my god, they might not be a thing anymore, when really people look, and you know, although I don't really like when people replace a deceased member, but sometimes, you know, you kind of have to. But if someone leaves the band, quits the band, and you want to find somebody to replace them, that's fine. But the fact that these bands really didn't go out there and do that. I mean, Paramore went with a full album without a drummer. Fall Out Boy brought all of its members back. And Panic at the Disco, sure, maybe added Dylan Weeks down the line. But him and Spencer Smith said, we're going to make an album together. Just us two. We don't need anybody else. We might bring people in, but we don't need official members to create an album. And for that, I commend them for that. You know, not giving up, not quitting when they were down, and just kind of working through things as, you know, adults and normal people would. Because sometimes quitting is never the answer, although for a lot of bands you look and you go, ugh, maybe it is. But for these three bands, it was just a matter of they needed time. They needed to see where they were going to go, whether people still cared, whether they still cared. And eventually the Pop Punk Big Three in 2013 all made one big massive comeback and are still going today at higher levels than I think they were early on in their careers. So, yeah. Anyway, that does it. You can tell me in the comments below, what did you think of this video? Did you like it? Do you want me to do more videos like this? And yeah, I will catch you guys in the next one.